name is George Galloway, presenter of كلمة on Mayadeen television. Morning to you. I don't mince my words. I speak كلمة and my audience does too. كلمة free word, free for me, free for you. Catch it. Nice to meet you, brother. Welcome to كلمة with me, George Galloway, for Mayadeen television, coming from London, talking about Germany and indeed the European continent as a whole. Germany, the most powerful country in Europe, the biggest economy in Europe, is in desperate trouble. So desperate, the Chancellor had to scurry to China to try and rescue their relationship with at least one of the United States' main adversaries. Not only was its vital infrastructure, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, blown up, most probably by Britain and the United States of America, but the people of Germany are currently scouring the woods, cutting down trees for the fuel to keep warm. It is also true that Germany is losing its factories. Some, like BASF, have literally unbolted from the floor and shipped to China. Others are shipping to the United States. Indeed, Germans, never mind their factories, are applying for green cards in their droves as their industries relocate to places where fuel, energy, is at least in some kind of supply. The proximate reason is that Germany was more dependent than anywhere else in Europe on Russia for its energy. 50% of its energy coming from the now severely sanctioned neighbour to its east. But that's not Germany's only problem. It has an exceedingly large population of former refugees and asylum seekers and other kinds of migrants who are now forming pockets of the unemployed and are increasingly scapegoats from German citizens for the levels of unemployment, underemployment, and job insecurity that exist there. Germany, formerly the banker for the poorer parts of Europe, is now having to tighten its belt, formerly in recession. It also has a banking sector at very grave risk of collapse. Deutsche Bank in particular is one that most watchers are watching for signs that it will be the first banking domino to fall in the next round of banking collapses, having not fully recovered from that of 2008. Germany has a minority government led by little soldier Schulz, as I call him, who is entirely dependent on a Green Party, which is simultaneously savage for war, which you might think is slightly damaging for the environment, and also mad for greenery and quackery and wokery of all kinds, which is increasingly alienating the mass of the German population. The stability that Angela Merkel brought to Germany over so many years seems like a distant memory now. But of course, when Germany sneezes, the rest of Europe catches influenza, and so any collapse in Germany is likely to see them tumbling elsewhere on the European continent, including Britain, which is not in the European Union, but definitely still vitally affected by events there. As always, I'm joined by a group of distinguished experts. I am merely the enthusiastic amateur here. Let's start with one of the Mr. Brexits. Robert Olds is one of the men from the Bruges Group, one of the organisations, which for many years appeared to be voices in the wilderness, crying out for Britain to withdraw from the European Union. They got their way, and I was one of their allies on the left. We got our way, we got our Brexit, but we're not out of Europe, Robert, are we? Events in Europe vitally affect us. How do you see Germany's immediate future?
Well, Germany is in a great deal of trouble, and they've made all the wrong decisions of late, relying on Russian gas, which of course has been blown up, and now they're reliant on American gas, which is being sold to them at exorbitant prices. Their car industry, which was a great success of post-war Germany, they bet heavily on diesel. Then, of course, there was Dieselgate because their car producers were manipulating the results because they were heavily polluting. They might have lower carbon dioxide, but the nitrous oxide and the particulates, the things that really affect people's health, come out of their cars in excessive amounts, and they got caught cheating those tests and faced massive billion-pound fines. And, of course, now the regulators are turning against diesel. So Germany is in big trouble. But, of course, this is partly a mess of their own making. They got rich largely since 2001 through exploiting other countries in Europe, through the use of the euro, having it too low, and taking advantage of unit labour costs, which were very competitive in Germany, and they managed to destroy other nations' economies on the periphery of Europe, selling their exports, having an export-led economy, which made them very rich at the expense of other countries that just couldn't compete. So in a sense, the chickens are coming home to roost, and those countries' economies are damaged by Germany and, of course, the global recession that we're going into now again, and they're losing their markets, and they're going to be in big trouble. But of course, it's a mess of their own making, and thankfully Britain is out of it because, as you mentioned, their banking system is going to blow up as well. And if we were in the European Union, Britain would be liable for their debts. We would have to be paying when they can't pay their creditors. We would have to be paying. Thankfully, we're out of that now, and so we're some degree of insulation. And really, perhaps this would be a good thing because the European economy has been made sclerotic by Germany. They've fiddled the system. They've used the European Union to make the rules to support their big producers, their big industrialists and conglomerates. James Dyson, British entrepreneur, he wanted regulations that would favour his manufacturing. The European Union produced regulations that favoured German industry. Well, of course it would. It's anti-competitive. It was beggaring its neighbours, and Europe without Germany at the helm is going to be a very good thing.
The societal pressures, of course, of one of those things that they did over decades are considerable. I refer to the drawing in of very large numbers of migrant labour. How do you see that impacting on the situation in Germany?
Yeah, it's always been the German approach. Even during the Second World War, they took in slaves and cheap labour, often slaves, to produce their weapons. After the war, they brought in cheap labour from Turkey to work in their car industry, and then would threaten them. Say, if you don't accept low wages, we'll just replace you with new waves of migrants. They then brought in more. Angela Merkel opened the door to many Syrian refugees, other people who essentially primarily economic migrants, but the countries that had been essentially devastated by NATO bombing in some cases in terms of Libya or Afghanistan came across to Germany, and they thought they were going to get a pool of cheap labour. But that's all well and good if the economy is growing and they can supply the jobs. But, of course, they can't at this point in time. And, of course, Germany has lost a lot of friends because they then had this massive problem and they tried to push the migrants out to other countries in Eastern Europe, Poland, Hungary. They were saying no. And so Germany has isolated itself in Europe. It's tried to social dump the migrants that they mistakenly took in when they thought they could accommodate them, and now they're paying the price. But other countries are also going to be affected.
Charles Kelly, you're a financial podcaster and author. Do you recognize the Germany that Robert describes?
I do, actually, and I've spent a lot of time in my past in Germany. I also recognise the thing about the migrants when Angela Merkel said, yes, come in, and that could have been the cause of this migrant wave that's still going on today, of people just deciding, well, forget about immigration policy, we'll just turn up there. But, yeah, I remember going to Germany years ago when my German friends they always had saying two jokes. One of them was about cars. They'd say, in England, you have sorry about the accent, in England, you have the Jaguar. You need two Jaguars, one in the garage for repair and one to drive. And the other joke was...
They weren't wrong, of course, on that.
That's true, because they're Mercedes. And the other joke was about our inflation. I used to say, why is your mortgage rate lower than mine? Because of your inflation. We don't have inflation in Germany. Well, not since the Weimar Republic. And I think that's why they're so scared of inflation. But now it seems it's almost a tragedy what's happening now. You mentioned BASF, you mentioned that they're going into recession next year. And then you've got the European Central Bank. And I just wanted to pick out a quote. They said they would have to continue raising interest rates to meet their 2% target on inflation beyond the point at which they need to inflict, and this is the word, pain on the job market. They want to inflict pain. And they use that word pain. It was in the Financial Times. And I think they don't seem to care. And one of your guests a few weeks ago said they don't care about the ordinary people who will suffer when they bring out these policies. They've put the world in trouble with massive money printing on an industrial scale. $30 trillion have been printed since the last financial crisis. No wonder there's inflation. It's not because we're going out spending too much and having a good time. It's because the money every year is worth 10% less than it was last year. And now we, the ordinary people, will have to suffer for their mistakes while they inflict pain on the job market. So to me, it's a tragedy, really.
Joseph Robertson, you're the strategic director, no less, of the Orthodox Conservative Group. Is it the absence of conservative government in Germany now that has placed the country in such crisis? And can the Social Democrats, as they call themselves, with their Green allies, politically survive this process of pain that they're going to inflict on their own people?
I think it's the promiscuity of globalisation coming to its final conclusion. It goes above ideology. It's a supranational issue. It's something that's eating into the marrow of Germany, affecting the whole of Europe, and some countries are beginning to have had enough. You know, if we look elsewhere, we've seen Sweden do a dramatic about turn away from, you know, its commitments to the 2030 agenda, its commitment to net zero. I think what we're seeing with Germany is a replacement of national pride without, you know, its sovereign and military history, with all that gone post the World Wars. It turned to globalisation as a source of national pride. Let's be a leader in the global project. Let's do something different economically. And they're suffering the consequences of that, because with their deindustrialisation now, they are falling headlong into madness. They are saying what hasn't worked can still work. They're turning away from natural resources. They're looking to green energy as their saviour in all of this. The reality is that no country in the world has ever had a green grid and cannot do so in such a short space of time, especially not in a financial crisis. The fact that they were so reliant on Russian energy is almost another piece of national pride. It was saying, we can stand alone in this world. We can be a pinnacle for globalization. We don't need our own resources. We can be the new Davos country. Forget the Davos man. And they've become a parable for the rest of the world. It's now about whether or not we heed that, and whether or not we want to be the next as a matter of consequence.
I'm not sure if it's a parable or a parody. The paradoxical place in the government, crucial, of a Green Party demanding endless war on natural resources has got the Germans out in the woods looking for trees to cut down.
I think we can refer that to what's happening in Britain. Let's look at the Drax power plants, a great aspirational project of the green agenda. We could not be bothered to cut down our own trees because we don't want to do that anymore. So now we're importing 80% of the wood that's burnt at the Drax power station from America, which even Kwasi Kwarteng saw might be slightly odd economically. But, you know, the Germans have taken that to a whole new level. They haven't responded to the crisis by opening up the coal factories, going full tilt at nuclear and looking for ways out. They've continued this snowballing effect of actually, you know, withdrawing from different options as far as energy is concerned.
They paid South Africa and Indonesia to cut down on coal mining, and they're now buying South African and Indonesian coal. You couldn't make it up. Let's hear from a German then. J. Michael Seifert is a German, but living in Mexico, having previously lived in the United States. He is an ethnographic journalist and an eminent documentary filmmaker. Thanks for joining us, friend.
Okay, my pleasure.
Why is Germany suffering the most from the sanctions placed on Russia? I characterized it in the old Chinese saying of struggling to lift a huge stone only to drop it on our own feet. And the Germans are the big toe. And boy, they are hurting, aren't they?
Well, I think first we have to describe how Germany is constructed as an industrial nation. Everybody says, well, it's an export nation and what have you. But essentially, Germany is a conglomerate of thousands of small family businesses. You know, family business in the sense that they may have 50 employees, but they're still in some village with a factory producing precision products or valuable goods, which are largely reliant on export. German industry, besides Volkswagen and Siemens and Bayer and these kind of guys, doesn't really rely on Wall Street or credit as such. It's a productive powerhouse, where if you have a financial crisis in the United States, there's like a imminent collapse at some point because banks would fall down and America would fall down. Germany doesn't work that way. The sanctions that are imposed at this point affect not only the energy sector and the labor market and the export potential and machine that Germany represents, it affects the household of the very same Germans that represent the industry. Because it's not a workers' country as such, it's a country of small businesses. I mean, literally thousands and thousands of business in every village. Think about it, they have 6,000 different beers. You know, these are companies that make, I don't know, 1 million bottles of beer, but they don't export to the entire planet. They produce and produce and produce. Today, the sanctions have basically put this giant brick into the bicycle, because you can't have 10% inflation and sanctions that restrict your. I mean, people are paying 10 times as much for energy as they used to. A baker, a butcher, a machine builder, that just doesn't work.
I mean, Europe is paying the price, but Germany, the highest price of all. German factories are literally being unbolted and shipped out of the country. Germans are queuing for green cards in the United States. Do you accept that that's the fate of Germany in 2022?
Right. I think that's unfortunately what we have to make of this. Because, I mean, in the late 90s, famously, the Chancellor Gerhard Schröder was a social democrat. He did the Trumpian kind of approach to running politics. He took an airplane, like the German Air Force One, so to speak. He put 50, 60 of the top industry executives into it. Then he flew to Saudi Arabia, to China, and all over the world to make deals, right? And Germany enjoyed a boom because the approach was practical. No, we're an export powerhouse. We produce really good stuff, and not just dental floss. I mean, they make high precision machinery. And he went to sell it to everybody, and everybody bought it.
How did a people, the Germans, known everywhere as rational and productive people, agree to a series of actions which have become entirely irrational from the point of view of Germany's national interest and economically ruinous?
Well, I don't think Germans are doing it. And I don't even think it's so much of an economic crisis, as we would call it, because if you look around what the government is actually doing, they're building $1 billion project in Berlin, to house the new German government, whenever that is, or whoever that will be. If they can do $1 billion for the infrastructure, for the political and administrative purposes, they got money, and they got plans. But the plans don't really include the German people as such. I think they're being deindustrialized in a way, not because of AI and automation, but because they're just simply a lot of useless eaters, as they call them. Yeah. So we have these millions of non-essential Germans who they're going to be phased out. So it's not the German people participating in any of this. It's a self-destruction. That would make no sense. But like you and I can talk on a Zoom call. If you were a teacher, you could talk to 80,000 pupils, and you don't need 80,000 teachers or 10,000 teachers for that. One guy can teach 80,000 kids. So technology is totally replacing something that happened in Germany in 1848. You had industrialization taking over, and it became an economic crisis. Yeah. They've had crises for 170 years. That's part of the franchise. Our brand is crisis kind of franchise, no? And so the government keeps doing that, except at this point, it is completely contrary to any meaningful outcome. Because you can't take in 5 million refugees, or how many, 4 million from Syria and the Middle East, and millions from Ukraine. You can't do that. They're not going to go home, right? They are going to have to integrate and work for relatively lower wages. They're going to replace half the German workforce, in a sense, over the next few years. What are these people going to do? They're telling German pensioners to go to Greece where the sun shines, because they can't afford on their pension to live in Germany. They're going to freeze to death. All these things make no sense. That doesn't. At the same time, the United States is bringing in, command centers and military concepts to do its planning that completely excludes Germany as such. Because I don't think Germany benefits from the Arctic Circle, the trade routes to China, that kind of stuff. That's all an American benefit, So there's a bigger picture that I see, which is sort of Arctic focused. And for that, we're going to burn down Ukraine and dismantle Germany, because it doesn't really matter to the bigger technocratic world government, whatever you want to call it. No? So I think the German people is completely excluded from this.
Germany is an independent country of some considerable importance. Why should Germany be told what to do by the United States?
Well, to top it off, my last comment would be that, you've heard the German term for somebody who looks at Putin as a realistically intelligent person. They call him the Putin Versteher, which the person who understands Putin, that's a total no-no. It's like you're a sympathizer. Yeah, because you can't possibly acquire or reach any kind of peace if you don't know what the other guy wants or what they're thinking. The irony in all of this is that you have a very intelligent politician in Putin, who's eloquent and charismatic, and he can talk all day. Yeah, you try to find a guy like this in Germany or in the United States. That's just not possible. We got script reading prompter morons who just read. Yeah, the German foreign minister, she can't even speak English. Baerbock, yeah, the lady, she's a green politician, pro-war, radical person. It comes out of nowhere, doesn't seem to have any particular qualifications other than World Economic Forum backgrounds and training. And there she is talking all kinds of nonsense. We were in the streets in the 70s as school kids. They mobilized us against atomic power, nuclear power. In 1974, I remember standing at a bus station with the sign of a sun that was smiling and says, "Atomic power, no thank you." Those green people mobilized us at that time, because we are impressionable kids. And now it's the same people and their kids, who are running the show saying, let's go to war, let's send more weapons, Yeah, open the coal mines. You know, these guys, it's incredible. You know, it's incredible. It's just amazing.
It may be the greatest act of self-harm in international political and economic history. We'll be discussing it further after the break. Stay tuned. You're watching Kلمة with me, George Galloway, on Mayadeen television, coming from London, talking about Germany. Although not just Germany, Robert, but Germany is the most extreme example. As we heard our German guest there describe, I said an act of national self-harm. It's beginning to sound like national suicide to me for Germany.
Well, Germany's made some dreadful choices, such as getting rid of nuclear power and investing heavily in wind. Wind energy doesn't really produce, it requires subsidies. And there, of course, could be the real reason. Perhaps it's in a sense, a scam. It's a way of redistributing money from the least well-off, working people, and giving it to some corporation because it requires subsidies to work. It's not efficient. If it was efficient, there wouldn't be the case for people to lobby governments to push for the policies of having wind turbines, for instance, onshore or offshore, because the case would be there. It would be economically viable to do so. It would make economic sense, but it doesn't. That's why a lot of this green agenda is being pushed, because someone somewhere is making a lot of money from it. Just like in COVID, when, of course, there was a great redistribution of wealth to the most richest people in the world and the biggest corporations, as well as power being taken away from the likes of you and I to say what we wanted and to have control over our own lives. That then passed away to many corporations and many governments. They used that opportunity. And I think there's an agenda here. Someone somewhere is making a lot of money out of it. And that's driven a lot of these policies.
Joseph, the elephant in the room here was addressed by our German guest. The proximate reason for the immediate crisis, albeit there are underlying issues and historic issues, is that Germany is a apparently willing and extremely belligerent party to the NATO-Russia war in Ukraine. Any sign that the German public are beginning to say, hey, what's in this for me? Why am I acting as a frontline soldier for Joe Biden in Washington?
Well, more than signs, I think. The recent polling among the German people suggests that 50%, over 50%, don't believe their government will get them through the winter financially. 31% can't afford to buy Christmas presents. And, you know, they reckon that Germany is going to be shelling out at least 280 billion in response to the mishandling of its own crisis this winter. I mean, so the people are able to see it. The mask is off. It's gone. The people are very aware of their situation. I would suspect the 50% who aren't yet saying that are well off enough to think that they aren't going to be in that position, but at some point they'll join. The unions are striking over there as they are here. We're going to have our postal services shut down, our nurses walking out, our civil service in disarray, as it is already, but it's going to be even worse. And the Green lobbyists continue. They continue to push this idea because they believe that they have enough public support against all obvious bets and hedging. They are pushing against civil unrest, not believing it will happen. And believe me, it will happen. The people will fight back, as they always do. Eventually, people have had enough. If you can't put Christmas presents on the table for your kids, you've had enough. If you can't heat your family home through the winter, you've had enough. People in Sweden have voted that way. People in Italy have voted that way. Germany will be next, we will be next, the people will ally, there will be people's alliances rising in all of these countries. And the grassroots will have its say, regardless of ideology. This isn't a time for parties anymore. This is a time for the people to actually say, we've had enough. It's bigger than Brexit. This is Europe-wide, possibly even global. We're going to see this across all the countries that have inflicted this on their people by virtue of joining in with the Paris Climate Agreement and all the other treaties that are essentially, as Robert just said, a way of managing wealth back to the people who want to redistribute it.
Charles, Schultz did show some independence of mind by heading off to China and playing footsie with the government there, to the anger of some, including in Washington, who prefer China as a pariah, as arm's length at best. Is that going to work for Germany? What's in it for Germany in making footsie with the Chinese government in Beijing?
Well, I guess it's a big market for Germany. Germans are acting for Germany. They've decided they've got to do something. And I guess it's a good move for them rather than just going along with America all the time. And I agree with what Joseph and Robert were saying, and you, that it's a really strange situation. I mean, as for the people's revolt, as it were, I mean, the people put up with what went on in the lockdown and they just meekly went along with it.
I'm not sure that Joseph's not being over-optimistic.
I do wonder.
That.
And the Germans
paradox
are so
for me to say that to
don't
you.
like being cold and don't like being hungry. I think that's the...
No, you're right.
There's already been marches in Germany and other European countries against the sanctions on Russia and wanting to end Western European countries' involvement in that war, if not indeed siding with the Russian point of view. So people are up in arms to some degree already. And of course, civilization is just several meals away from ending. If people are hungry, then things can change quite drastically.
Let them eat cake.
Quote. I wish I'd said that.
Yeah, let them eat cake. That starts revolutions, doesn't it?
Run out. Let's go to China then and talk to Professor Benjamin Chow, who's a professor at the Paris School of Technology and Business in France and the Southwestern University of Finance and Economics in China. Professor, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Professor, what is this dispute that Schultz has been involved in trying to negotiate about the port of Hamburg? Can you explain it?
Well, I think a pressure from both within and outside Germany that has fueled the responses to restrain the current Chinese investment of the Hamburg port. Within Germany, whether the Chinese company COSCO should be permitted to participate in the port's ownership has produced a political dispute, as Germany is now still wrestling with the consequence of the U.S. pressure to influence Germany to decouple it from the dependence on Russian natural gas. Recently, lawmakers from the Green Party and the Free Democrats, which formed a governing coalition last year with Schultz, Social Democrats, openly criticized the original proposal, and 6 German government ministries initially rejected the deal on the grounds that COSCO, already the port's biggest customer, could get too much leverage. Well, eventually, Germany has struck a compromise by allowing COSCO to acquire a stake of less than 25% instead of the originally planned 35%. The Germany's Economic Affairs Ministry said that the decision was made to prevent a strategic investment by COSCO in the terminal and reduces the acquisition to a purely financial investment. Above 25%, an investor can block a company's decisions. In the bigger European context, I think there was a fear that the purchase could open up the possibility of Beijing's influence on Europeans' critical infrastructure, especially that China already invested in a few ports in Europe. Of course, this view has neglected the people and the infrastructure that it is badly needing some foreign investment. In the bigger context of the West, I think the U.S. is instrumental in the direction of the Ukraine crisis, which has significantly weakened Europe, especially Germany, who needs cheap energy for its manufacturing sector. That's the supply side of the Germany economy. What's the largest demand side of the German's products? Well, of course, it is China. If the demand side is also restricted, I think the German economy will definitely be doomed. Given the current state of the world economy, promoting openness and cooperation and boosting trade will not only benefit China and Europe, but also is conducive to the world's economic recovery.
Germany is an independent country of some considerable importance. Why should Germany be told what to do by the United States, especially when the consequences for Germany are so patently obvious?
Well, I think it is really what the best strategy Germany should follow. In fact, from the current deal of Costco and other collaboration with China, as reviewed in Scholz's most recent visit in China a few days ago, that Germany is striking its balance, but it is moving away from the previous Chancellor Merkel's trade priority with China. It is more taking care of the needs of the U.S., fitting into the picture of the U.S., especially in positioning China as a competitor in high technology, so that Germany is now following the Five Eyes and also the U.S. in thwarting China's growth by restricting, sale of the chip businesses, supplying high-tech chips to China, and also try to force China to, to move away from high technology. Although China, of course, is not following what the U.S. is doing. At the same time, Germany is taking care of the needs of its company as well. So because in the last 50 years, actually, Germany bilateral trade with China has increased 1,000 times. Okay, the annualized rate of growth is about 12% in the last 25 years. It is the single most important trading partner for China. But as the Chinese economies progress, it will just upgrade its industry. And with a lot of help from Germany, we see a lot of scientific parks invested by Germany, which sometimes there is a joint venture, which Germany still keeps part of this product, the technology and secrets, and also it is working with Chinese firms to create a little bit lower end product in the beginning and slowly upgrading the technology collaboration. And in return, the Germany companies benefited from the huge growth of the Chinese market.
Does Scholz's visit to China indicate that, at least in part, Germany is trying to keep some kind of balance in its geopolitical relations, as compared, for example, to the United Kingdom?
Well, I spent 4 months in Cambridge in 2020. So I observed what's going on in the pandemic in UK's increasing tension with China over the Hong Kong incident, over a lot of restriction to China. But the current changing hands of the top leaders in the UK has taught the world a lesson that is, naively, single-sidedly following the US in containing China, or just containing a large trade partner that you could benefit hugely from could be disastrous, with a lot of instability of the economy and so on. And in the most recent trip of Chancellor Scholz in China, he openly stated that Germany is against isolating a particular country. Germany is against decoupling from China. You will still continue to work with China. I think he's very smart on that, and which is a stance that is also echoed by the EU Commissioner for Trade, Valdis Dombrovskis, in the recent German Mechanical Engineering Summit in Berlin. He said decoupling from China is not an option for companies in the European Union, calling China an important growth market and a valuable source of affordable investment for the EU. So that he said that the trading relationship with China needs more balance and reciprocity.
Well, they say echoed, but the reality is we're being buffeted one way and another by political pressures, which have nothing to do with economics, nothing to do with economic reality, still less our economic interests. We're buffeted by the green lobby with all the consequences we've discussed. Now we're being buffeted by the US government vis-a-vis both Russia and China.
Yes, I agree with everything you say, George, and the other guests. I want to chat a bit about the German people, because my recollection of the German people is that they are good savers. They don't spend so much on credit. Now, maybe that's not the youngest generation, but certainly they were quite conservative in the way they spent money and saved. So maybe they've got a chance of getting through this. Whereas in the UK, millions of people have no savings whatsoever, and a quarter of people in the UK, 25%, have less than £100 of saving. So they really are only one or two salary checks from disaster, from bankruptcy. So, and the other thing I'd say is that a few years ago, you would have talked about the southern European states, the so-called pigs, the Portugal, Italy, Greece and Spain as the ones to go under. And now they're saying it's Germany. You could add the G to the Greece there in Germany if they go into recession. So it's surprising that we're seeing that such a large country go down in this way. And the way we're being buffeted is just totally illogical to the economy and to the ordinary people who will suffer this.
Robert, I do pinch myself and wonder if it's all a dream. If we take one self-harming measure, twist, turn after another, where's it all going to end? If even Germany, pragmatic, industrious, big saving Germany has fallen to madness, what hope for the rest of Europe?
Well, Germany is a very establishment country. It's dominant within the European Union. It hasn't necessarily been following the right model. It's been practicing austerity at home in quite a severe way. It's been restricting its own domestic demand to rely on exports. And if that export market goes, it used to sell a lot of cars to Russia, it used to rely on Russian energy. If those export markets go, then of course,
well, that one's gone.
There's not the opportunity to
Mercedes just pulled out of Russia in another act of national self-harm.
But it's been a fake economy. It's been a fraudulent economy through producing money and, in a sense, quantitative easing on a massive scale, which is actually against the Maastricht Treaty. They shouldn't actually been doing these policies. The European Central Bank essentially buying bonds on behalf of other banks to keep the financial sector alive. But it's on life support, and eventually it will fail. And it's a model that hasn't worked for Germany. They've had some good times out of it, but of course caused a great deal of harm for other nations as well. If we look at what they did to Greece just after Greece's financial crash, when they needed support, Germany said, no, we will stop the money going to you unless you have severe, absolutely severe real austerity that was led to massive unemployment, much as 30% unemployment, the reduction of pension, grandmothers having to eat out of bins, and forcing Greece to sell off its resources, such as like the port of Piraeus, which they had to sell off to the Chinese for a fraction of what it was worth. So they've committed, in a sense, some real economic crimes against their neighbours and the most vulnerable, and now they're reaping the whirlwind.
And now they're encouraging their pensioners to leave Germany and go and live in Greece. You couldn't make it up. Joseph, we live in a democracy of sorts. There is a relationship of sorts between people's unhappiness and the downfall of governments. They don't necessarily get a better government, but at least they bring down the existing one. I refer to Italy, of course. It remains to be seen if it's a better one, but it definitely got rid of the centrists. How long before that begins to feed into political decision-making on the ground by the public in these European countries?
I think it's already here. I said at the time, I think this is we're not at the crest of the wave, but we're certainly at the bottom of it right now, and this can only rise up. What we saw in Italy was phenomenal because it wasn't just the people voting, it was the political parties recognising that they had to come together to change things, and that doesn't happen very often. If Berlusconi can cut a deal with someone, there must be something seriously wrong. And I think
a deal in which he becomes the third
lesser.
The lesser, yeah.
And you know, I think over here that could potentially happen. There's still some way for it to go to form here and something coherent. It could be through another party. It could be through a coalition. We're yet to see. But Vox are going to be polling higher in Spain. In France, there's already a revolution of sorts on both sides of the political aisle. The centrists are out because what the centrists are doing are centralising. And it goes back to your point about the banks. The next thing on the cards, of course, is digital cash. No longer are we going to have cash. It's going to be a cashless society. Now the government's going to be able to control what you do with your money. And that doesn't work well in a place like Germany, well, as one of your guests has already said. It's a country built on SMEs. It's not a country built just purely on the worker and the elite. It's a country built on its middle class, on its small business. If those businesses become non-transactional and they start to struggle with logistics, the whole thing falls apart. It's the same to a degree in Britain as well. If we're facing a situation where, in a similar way to what's happening in China with the social credit system, if we're seeing that translated to the European model, it just won't work because we are not used to being under authority in Europe, and the people will respond to that. They have to. They're left with no alternative when their businesses are gone, and they have nowhere to turn to except to try and overturn the existing structure.
Extraordinary. Charles, last word, I think, from you. You're the finance expert here. How close are we to another 2008 series of banking crashes, starting perhaps with Deutsche Bank in Germany?
Yeah, I was just reading today that there's possibly two big banks about to collapse. It could happen again. I think the stock market's been overinflated by this quantitative easing and this money printing. So we probably are on the brink. When you said, how is it going to end? All I would say to people is that, we can't control what the World Bank does and the WF and what the world economy is doing. All we can control is what we do is in our own economy. And that's what I write about and blog about and podcast about, that you've got to try and get your own house in order, because we've had the good times of the last 10 years, low interest rates, cheap borrowing, everyone's been out having a great time, remortgaging their houses and buying more houses. And now the chickens are coming home to roost. So people have got to tighten their belt and get used to getting back to saving rather than, I want it now and I'm just going to buy on credit. So we've just got to get our own finances in order, because I can't control what, is going to happen, in the next Davos meeting or...
Yeah, but if your salary disappears, you'll not be able to get your own house in order. And that house is going to be freezing cold this winter.
But there's a lot of jobs needed. There's lots of vacancies for jobs in Europe. They need millions of drivers. So there are job vacancies, and a lot of people here
Yeah,
not
but
responding to
the
that.
diesel to put in the truck is increasingly unaffordable or banned or restricted in one way or another. All these factors contradict each other.
Red tape.
There's a kind of madness abroad. I hope you've enjoyed the show. I've been George Galloway. This has been Kali Mahora. You've been a wonderful audience. Thanks for watching.